Monica, a friend, is a friend of us all. So Monica and I met many years ago, actually, in a testers Slack group, and through that became good friends, and then ultimately ended up working together for a bit as well, where she was my leader, and it was there's Amanda. Amanda also worked with us, and grew our QA skills and our friendship together while there. Monica has been described as a tester friend, mental health advocate, and human among humans, which is very true. All of those are true. With 8 years of testing experience in highly regulated industries, she's become very familiar with the risks that come with working heavily with compliance, legal, and technical constraints. When she's not testing, she loves dancing in her apartment in Chicago and riding her scooter around Chicago, and also taking motorcycle lessons.
Yeah.
And chilling with her two cats, Alex Trebek and Sean Connery.
Who happen to be here and here as my emotional support. Awesome. Should we kick this shindig off? Teresa, thank you so much for that introduction. I feel so loved. This talk is going to be about a test framework, FRANC, that I built earlier this year. And the ultimate goal of that framework was really to answer the question, when will testing be done? So, as Teresa mentioned, my name is Monica A. Friend. Yes, that is my real name. I also enjoy, when I'm not software testing, being a rainbow, as you can see. So yeah, again, I've been in the tech industry for about 11 years, testing for about 8 years. I've worked in large-scale purchase organizations, enterprise software, auto insurance. I currently work for OppFi, which is a loan company here in Chicago. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to start talking a lot about what exactly is a FRANC. We're going to go into the origin story, some of the reasons why FRANC became a thing, why I built out FRANC. Then we're going to start talking about how to go about implementing a FRANC, this FRANC testing framework, with your own projects. How to, again, nourish, grow, tend to this brand new testing tool, and also maybe be able to get buy-in from your team. And then we're going to start talking about some of the benefits and drawbacks of using a FRANC, especially when it's your first time using this FRANC testing framework. Before we start going into FRANC, the specifics of FRANC, how much I love FRANC, I thought it might be a good idea just to align on some testing terminology that we're going to be using frequently in this talk. Again, this is this is how I define these terms. You can define these terms however you would like, but for the purpose of this talk, we're going to define the terms as such. So what exactly is a test framework? I am embarrassed to say that I actually had to look up the definition for what a test framework is. So a testing framework, as it is defined, not in Webster's dictionary, but I wish it was, it's a set of guidelines or rules used for creating and designing test cases. It's also important to note that a test framework is slightly different from a test automation framework. I think often it's used synonymously, but a test framework is going to be inherently different from a test automation framework. The test framework is going to be comprised of lots of different testing practices and tools, some of which might be automation, some of which might be other testing philosophies. Let's talk a little bit about what a testing strategy is versus a test plan. Spoiler alert, they're not the same thing. A testing strategy can be thought of the whys we're going to be testing, the hows we're going to be testing. And a testing strategy influences a test plan. A test plan is Solid, concrete scenarios, user stories that you for sure want to be hitting before you call a project done, which is like out into production. It's living its best life. End-to-end testing, one of my favorite terms to fight about. I'm just kidding, I never fight. End-to-end testing, as I define it, is the full holistic testing of an epic, of a feature, prior to that feature's launch, all the way out in production. And that's gonna be slightly different from regression testing. Regression testing, how I define it, is testing that continuously happens to ensure that we are not compromising the existing functionality for our users, especially as we're going to be introducing this new change into our production ecosystem, if you will. So again, these are some terms we're going to come back to frequently, and this is how I define them. So how did Frank become Frank? I never set out to build a testing framework. Again, I had to actually look up what a testing framework is and have people convince me that I built a testing framework. The original inception of Frank was actually this request for my team to make sure we didn't miss anything. And I said, okay, because that's such a huge, daunting task, because you often have so many points of reference, so many sources of truth. So I started looking through things like tickets that had like acceptance criteria and brief details, documents, whether those came from product individuals regarding the entire epic, technical specifications, even third-party documentation on how to use their services. I also found a lot of value in looking at diagrams. I'm a very visual learner. So being able to look at a diagram of how things currently work, user flows that are currently in production, that are currently being used, and then looking at diagrams of how those flows are going to be changed really instills a sense of assuredness in my testing strategies. So in order to satisfy my team's request, I started looking at all of these points of truth and just like mooshing them together in like one document. And thus, Frank was born. I originally called it Frankenstein's baby because I was just mashing all of these different things together. But people in stand-up didn't want to hear updates on Frankenstein's baby. So I ended up shortening it to Frank, which stands for a full risk analysis of a new concept or concern. So you can think of it almost as like a risk analysis tool for testing strategies. So what exactly is a Frank, this full risk analysis of a new concept? We can see here on this slide, there are a lot of different reference points, if you will. Again, this primarily came from me just like mooshing together all of this different information from all of these different testing practices and principles. So you can think of Frank as a leveling tool. Frank can be leveraged as a way to make sure that all shareholders, business, product, developers, testers, those in customer service, all understand where we are in terms of building the epic, where we are in terms of, estimated deadlines, and also the either increasing or decreasing risk of introducing said feature epic into production as we're going along with development. Frank is also a home for lots of historical knowledge. As you can see on the side, we do have a reference point for the epic. Historical knowledge sharing is an extremely difficult thing. I mean, nobody wants to keep documentation updated, anything like that. So having these reference points in one solid document is going to enable individuals to say, ooh, I don't know how that works, but you know what? We worked on that. It's in the Frank. Let me go back and look at those reference points. And I can give you Slack conversations, Zoom videos, all of that stuff. You can also think of Frank as a resource guide for these large scale epics. Oftentimes, when we're looking at large scale epics, we don't necessarily know how we're going to go about building things. Sometimes we don't even know what we're going to be building, which is fine. So having this resource guide is going to help individuals, whether that's testers or shareholders, be able to revisit all of the information that you've gathered in one place. Ultimately, the point of a Frank is to be able to answer the question, how to know when testing is done. The answer is you'll never know when testing is done. There's an infinite number of combinations that you'll need to be testing, edge cases, the what ifs, the uncertainty. So having a Frank and ultimately at the bottom, that full risk analysis transforms this question from how to know when testing is done to how do we know when we are in a position where we can turn this feature on in production and have the least amount of regressions and show-stopping bugs. So it's not necessarily when is testing going to be done, it's when are we comfortable with the level of testing we have completed. It's also a little bit of a testing progress bar. So individuals can just reference the doc and see how far you are or your team. So thinking about when you need to build a Frank is very, very critical. A Frank, as you have seen, can be very, very beefy. It's a very large tool, which is why paying attention to when you might need a Frank is important. You wouldn't want to use a Frank for, let's say, a small feature change. Really, I keep talking about these large scale epics, these cross-cutting epics. That's really where a Frank, this full risk analysis of new concept, starts to shine. So as you go about deciding that you need a Frank, what do you actually need to start building this framework? Having a solid foundation in testing principles is an interesting topic because I didn't say a strong foundation in testing principles. I didn't say an expert foundation in testing principles. You're going to be thinking about things like the test pyramid, security testing, accessibility testing, exploratory testing, all of these different methodologies, if you will. Having a solid foundation, and at least a few of those, is going to give you enough of a runway to actually start building out this test framework. Another thing that I found extremely helpful when building out a Frank is this willingness to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, can you help me? And also being okay with that. It's not, especially for me, since I'm self-taught, always very easy to say, I don't know what debouncing is. Can you explain that? It opens up this whole new space for this conversation to start happening, because also a very good way to ensure that you understand and you really know something is also to explain it to someone else. Saying I don't know gives that individual the opportunity to reaffirm what they know and to also distribute that information. Leading into the next thing, which is constant communication. If you use Slack or something like that, it gets really loud, it gets really noisy. And also having that sort of stream of communication as these different teams are building different parts, it's critical. The more critical thing about having that constant communication is making sure that the outcome of that communication makes its way back into Frank, if for anything but a reference point. With communication comes this idea of code switching. The way I talk to testers is going to be different from the way I talk to developers. And that's going to be different from the way I talk to product. So making sure I have that constant, effective, concise communication that everyone, all of the shareholders can understand will make your Frank sort of this one-stop shop, because everyone can read and understand the information that is included therein. You will need strong organizational skills. I feel like this is also almost like a testing tool, a testing principle, if you will. You're absorbing a lot of different information. And as you saw before, and as you'll continue to see throughout this presentation, there can be a lot of different sections to Frank that cover different areas of those testing principles, whether that's automation or exploratory testing or, testing on mobile devices. Having strong organizational skills will ensure that nothing really slips through the cracks. Of course, things do. They always do. But it's going to enable you to be able to hold on to that information in such a way where you can easily reference it as you see this epic sort of evolving. The last thing that you really do need is having a loving and supportive team. And I didn't set out to build a test framework. My team, thank goodness, was very willing for me to sort of run this experiment. They were very willing to review not only the contents of Frank, but also how Frank was just put together and give feedback on that. Without having that loving and supportive team, I don't think I would have been able to be as successful as I was building this out. So you have everything you need to build a Frank. How do you actually go about building a Frank, this full risk analysis of a new concept? Setting expectations with your project team. Setting expectations as soon as possible. Yeah, setting those expectations as soon as possible is going to start creating that shared understanding of your ultimate goal, building out this Frank. The first time you build it, the first time you sort of start integrating Frank into your workflows, it's going to be a little rough. I always think integrating new workflows into your daily lives is always a little rough. Setting the expectations is going to make sure that when it is rough, people understand that, and that as you iterate upon Frank, things will become a bit more smooth. Building out a Frank is going to be influenced in the information that you can gather. I often ask, how can I be the most effective to my mob, if you will, who's working on the project? Asking how can I be the most effective is going to set the tone. It's going to tell you, the tester, okay, what are we actually going to be working on today? I need to get my mind in that mindset and start to get ahead of some of the questions. As you're looking through Frank, you might say oh, we're going to start working on this API. I had some questions on how that API worked. I'm going to go get those answers. Leads into the next point, answering questions for developers, products, sometimes even business, other testers. Answering those questions, it doesn't necessarily always feel like you're testing. Sometimes it feels like you're a secretary almost. And I want to validate those feelings, because that's how I definitely felt when I started sort of building out Frank. And also answering those questions, even for myself, looking at existing tickets, documentation, Slack threads, it makes me feel more confident, more capable in my work. So in order to answer all these questions, looking at the tickets that you already have, that might not be just tickets from your team. That might also be tickets from other teams. Looking at any documentation that's been produced, Slack threads, especially if you have a dedicated Slack channel for all of the development, being able to pull those Slack threads, popping them into Frank, you'll be able to actually remember what goes on. I know when I go to sleep, everything just kind of falls out of my head. So having, even Slack threads in Frank. Make sure I don't forget anything. So if you're looking around and you still can't find all those answers, it's almost like asking, I don't know, asking, okay, I can't find this information. So who can get me these answers? Again, it's kind of a vulnerable thing, especially if it's a long-standing feature and you're like, oh, I actually don't know. And also, talking to individuals who can get you the answer, again, reaffirms what they know and also informs other individuals, breaking down knowledge silos. Building a Frank includes keeping Frank updated daily, sometimes multiple times in a day. Working in our industry, working in tech, things happen. AWS goes down, you have production issues. Sometimes things just go sideways, like with your staging environments. So having an eye on all of these outliers and how it's affecting your work and changing your work within Frank. When I say changing your work, I mean the entire team's work. Keeping that up to date informs other members who are either actively or passively looking at Frank for status updates. They have the most up-to-date information on development. Not that I don't enjoy talking to people, but also sometimes it's really nice to say, your question has been answered. Here is the part in Frank that will answer your question. So being able to kind of like delegate that stuff out and putting it on the other person so that they can learn and read frees up a lot of time. I'm in the business of teaching people how to fish and not just giving them a fish. So we saw before that there's a lot of different breakdowns within Frank. Now, why did I do this? I did this to give individuals the option to remove sections that, you know, don't necessarily apply. Like I have here cucumber scenarios. Those can be, you know, automation scenarios, scenarios that are captured within your test case management tool. So yeah, this is all configurable. Pull out whatever you don't want, put in whatever you do. But there are 4 areas that are sort of non-negotiable that you really do need. That's the objective, the features for the new epic, scenarios that are already covered, and then sort of the last little, you know, whipped cream on top, that full risk analysis for your entire epic. Briefly going through these, we have the objective. The objective is not only the objective of a Frank, but also what you are hoping to accomplish using this new test framework in the practical application of testing and building a test strategy for this new feature. We're going to go into the features for a new epic actually in the next slide. So I'm just going to skip these. Don't look at them. I forgot to remove them. Again, we'll talk about new feature work in the next slide. Automation coverage is for me a very powerful tool, and having that written down in Frank, other developers have told me that this is extremely helpful as well. If I don't have to test something, I don't want to. Analyzing the current test coverage over, you know, the areas that you are going to be working with and changing gives you not only a tighter feedback loop for if you have regressions, it also tells you what scenarios you really don't have to worry about. Or maybe looking at the coverage, you know, you have these certain set of tests that fail all the time. Okay, maybe that now informs us that we need to refactor that set of tests, or, you know, make sure we hit that with our, you know, human eyes, like manually, because we can't rely on the existing automation. And my favorite part, the full risk analysis. This comes probably a few days before actually, you know, having your go, no go conversation about turning something on in production. The full risk analysis includes all of the new feature work, as well as the automation coverage, analyzing any of the missed requirements, and giving your best estimate of what risk we are incurring by turning this on in production. This looks like a lot of text. We're going to go through bit by bit. I promise it's not that beefy. So I mentioned before that we're going to talk about sort of the feature section of Frank. This is like the most critical part of Frank in order to analyze if we got everything done. So first, we're going to call it what the feature is. In this instance, we have a feature being adding a shopping cart for users to store and see whatever items they want to purchase. Then we start to gather up all of the tickets, all of the user stories that are included, you can say, in relation to this feature. So let's say we have a ticket for building the shopping cart page. So it's like design and everything that comes with design, maybe accessibility, all that stuff. Let's say we have a ticket for, the shopping cart functionality, adding and removing, we have another ticket. So we have sort of the currently existing work that is laid out. Now that we have an idea of all of the work that's laid out within these tickets, and we know the goal, we know the feature, we can begin to perform this audit. Thinking about the feature and how users are going to start interacting with it. Okay, cool. We know that we have this new design. We know that we have all the information within that new design. Cool, cool, cool. We know that we have some of the functionality listed. Cool, cool, cool. We want to make sure that a user can, click proceed. Cool, cool, cool. As you consider these interactions, this audit of what is needed to build out this feature, I like to also consider the different interactions. This can be from service to service. This can be from team to team. I like to think about it from a service to service perspective, like kind of not even thinking about teams because we're all building something together. So here I have examples like, we have, the design service working with our primary API, checkout service. This can be a good starting point if you want to look at the automation coverage for your feature. As an outcome of the tickets and the audit work you've done, you'll start to see where there are missed requirements. I want to be very, very clear that this missed requirements section is not to point out where somebody has missed work or to be malicious or, to say, be a petty Betty and be like, you missed this part. Like, now we're not going to make our deadline. This missed requirements section is intended to be for our future selves. As we go about, let's say we iterate on the shopping cart experience, it's like V2 or something like that. We can go back to our Frank, to our full risk analysis, go to the missing requirements and say, oh, you know what? We forgot this last time. Let's make sure we don't forget that this time. And then the final part of this sort of feature breakdown is we start to talk about the overall risk. I like to start putting a risk down as soon as we've started building it, or as soon as I start to see where we have the audit and the missed requirements. So if something is completed, like think of it as dev complete, I usually just put low, medium, high. If something is currently in flight, I'll put whether it's increasing or decreasing. And again, because we are distributing this Frank document to many different individuals, I always provide context as to why I see here in this example, it's a medium risk and it's increasing. Okay, why is it increasing? We have a lot of requirements that were missed. And these requirements, if we're actually having individuals, proceed from the shopping cart to checkout or updating the total cost, that's a lot to consider. If we hadn't considered that before, that's going to increase development time. So that's why I have medium increasing listed here in this example. So yeah, there within your Frank, you'll probably have several different feature breakdowns because an epic is very rarely just like one feature. But yeah, this is an example of one of those features you're analyzing. Excuse me. So we have this testing strategy. We've built out this Frank. It's very robust. It's beautiful. You love it. You tell it it's special every single day. Let's start actually thinking about the test execution now. We have a very strong feeling for the strategy. How does Frank play into test execution? When I say test execution here, I'm talking about integration or end-to-end testing. Again, I'm a very visual person, so I like to have some sort of a ticket, if you will, whether that is, tracked on a Kanban board, an Agile board, a sprint board, what have you. Having that testing ticket, that end-to-end testing ticket for tracking is going to give your whole team this very nice visual representative of where you are in terms of test execution. So at the beginning, when we talked about testing terminology, we had test strategy and then a test plan. The test plan is, the user scenarios and, edge cases you want to make sure you hit. That test plan is going to be included in that end-to-end testing ticket for tracking. Now, why do we want to do this? Not only for, tracking purposes. I've found that a wonderful side benefit of having this test plan within a ticket is being able to delegate work. I always hate asking individuals to, stop development and help test. And also that's the nature of the beast. We have to be able to delegate testing scenarios to individuals who have more experience than we do. Maybe you're dealing with some sort of a marketing script or something. You need to be able to say like, oh, I don't know anything about marketing. Hey, individuals for marketing, we have this scenario. Can you look at this ticket and test that and then leave testing notes? Delegation is, I think, my theme for this year, like my goal, my 2021 goal. So far, it's going great. Again, we have the testing strategy that leads into the test plan. I also like to reference Frank in part of the test plan within the ticket. Having this ticket also to track your testing work, the test execution across whatever sort of a board you support, not only gives an indicator to maybe your dedicated product individual, your developers on how far along testing is going. It also facilitates a conversation during daily stand-up. Oh, I need assistance. I am having issues with this scenario. We need to consider this, or maybe, everything is cool and things are going smoothly. So post-test execution, or testicution, if you will. Some of the immediate results is going to be like a successful launch. And successful launch isn't just like, we did it, it's turned on. Now we're never going to think about it again. I consider a successful launch as a launch that saved development time and resources. The earlier we can start working on a Frank, being able to audit, what misrequirements there are, the riskiest parts of, certain features, we get ahead of that. We can resolve that. Even before development has begun. Finding those issues that early on is going to save time, resources, sanity. It's also going to significantly decrease the appearance of show-stopping bugs within production. That tends to make a lot of people happy for several reasons. Also, I consider a successful launch as being able to launch a new project, being able to launch a new product, and being able to also measure customer satisfaction, whether that is, having user interviews, seeing, if more individuals were calling in because they were confused as to how the new feature worked. That for me is a successful launch, just getting any feedback back so that we can then improve the next time we get a feature such as this out the door. Another one of the immediate results and immediate benefit of implementing a FRANC framework is having this brand new shared understanding. Cross-cutting epics are hard unto themselves. And also it starts to force you to not only think about, okay, mock out this service. Okay, this is how it affects, my team. But you start to have this brand new shared understanding of how these services are actually working together. It becomes almost like team agnostic. You start thinking of services in terms of user flows, in terms of what it's trying to accomplish, instead of, oh, that belongs to that team. I can go over there. Having that brand new shared understanding builds a lot of trust. You go into the next refinement session, the next grooming, you're able to speak more effectively to how all of these services are interacting, and therefore how we need to go about actually building a thing. What are the long-term benefits? FRANC is a lot of work. Like, I'm not gonna lie, FRANC is a lot of work. And also for me as a tester, being in the industry that I am, the long-term benefits outweigh the work that is needed to put in. Long-term benefits, you have returning satisfied customers. You're not introducing regressions. People are able to continue using your product and then also being surprised and delighted. I think that's the term. Just basically being happy and being able to use your product with ease. It's a significant long-term benefit. We're breaking down knowledge silos. Being able to ask, I don't know, who can answer this question for me? Okay, but really, how does this service interact with that service? You start to break down these knowledge silos from product to development, from business. Those lines start to blur because you're learning so much from all of these different individuals. You start thinking about services from a team agnostic stance. You start breaking down those team knowledge silos and you start to learn more about all of the interactions therein. Talked a little bit about cross-team collaboration. Breaking down those knowledge silos and having that historical documentation contained within your FRANC document ensures that all of your information stays up to date. Yeah, no one wants to keep documentation up to date. It's like pulling teeth at this point. Having that documentation within FRANC, though, when you re-reference it, let's say you're in a refinement session, a grooming session, you re-reference it, you're able to pull up that historical doc, say, this is how it is. Okay, now we're changing it to this is how it's going to be. We need to update that historical document. So you naturally start taking care of keeping your documentation up to date. And you begin to have a feel for when will testing actually be completed. You'll never know when testing is completed. It starts to turn into a conversation of when will we feel the most comfortable launching something into production. I do not like being the one person to say, yeah, we're good to go, or no, we're not. We start to have this benefit of identifying the risks, not only early on, but sitting down as sort of like a three amigos type mindset and saying, okay, if here's the remaining risks, are we cool with this? Like, this seems like a huge show-stopping issue. If it breaks, let's maybe not launch right now. Or we have, a few other risks that are low. You don't really need to worry about them. We're like, okay, we're not worried about that part. So let's talk a little bit about FRANC V2. We are in FRANC V2.1 at this point. I have been referencing a lot of James Bach heuristic risk-based testing. I'll pop up the bit.ly link so individuals can reference that PDF. As one of the philosophies in James Bach's article is this concept of a risk task matrix. A risk task matrix is a visual representation of all of the risks that are either assumed or are cropping up during development, or even, prior to development. And then on the other side, we start to list out remediation tasks, things that we can do to make these risks less scary or non-existent. So here we have an example of a risk task matrix. We have risks on one side, remediation tasks on the other. So this risk here we have laid out as we're integrating with a third-party API that is constantly changing endpoints. Oh, so how are we going to lessen that risk? How are we going to make that risk less scary? Let's see, we'll have weekly syncs with the vendors during development to make sure that we know when those endpoints are changing, and that vendor knows, what that could mean if they are changing their endpoint in production. Maybe we establish SLAs with a vendor in order to have a heads up when these changes are occurring. The ultimate benefit of having this risk task matrix is to have a comprehensive list on one side of all of the risks, a comprehensive list on the other side of different remediation or mitigation tasks, and being able to say, oh, you know what? We have weekly syncs with vendors actually helps decrease several risks. We need to spend a lot of time making sure that those weekly syncs are happening and we're getting the information we need. And maybe, I don't have a good example in here, but maybe for this risk, we have something, some very weird workaround, and maybe it just resolves this one risk. Maybe we're like, okay, maybe we don't need to do that. It's a visual representation of where to put the most effort in order to make all of those risks, to make the final risk assessment as low as possible. And that's it. That's the test framework I built. Please do feel free to reach me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn handle is Monica A. Friend. There's 2 A's in there. Questions, concerns, fears, hopes, dreams?
Monica, are there any template documents to go along with this, or is it just a process description?
That is an excellent point. That's actually the next iteration of Frank, is to start building out formalized documentation and to provide some sort of a template for individuals to use. So not yet, but that is the next process improvement that we'll be putting in place.
Okay, thank you.
For sure.
When that, we'll say version 3.0 of Frank comes out with the template and such, will we be able to request a copy of that to share with people?
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate goal of Frank, is to make everyone's life easier. So yeah, I'm in the process of actually building out a website that some of this information will be hosted on, and also I find a lot of benefit in being able to put this up in like a GitHub repo, so individuals can pull it down if they want. Also, I want to make this as accessible as possible. So I want to do a multi-pronged approach, having people be able to pull this down from a GitHub repo, and also individuals who may not, use GitHub can actually pull down templates, information within the website itself. I want to make this as accessible as possible to all individuals, whether or not they use Git or GitHub.
How open were people on your team to start using this, like and utilizing it? Was there any pushback?
Very, very good question. I'll go back to the point where I said I had a loving and supportive team, because I do have a lot of trust with my team. So I will say that. But the ask to figure out if we missed anything, the how I got to that point, nobody cared about. people were just like, can you just make sure that we didn't miss anything? And I was like, I guess. And so I just started, like I said, brain dumping into this document, and people found just that brain dump to be valuable. As you know, the first inception of Frank rolled around, we did see a significant decrease in production bugs. As we were going about, we caught, I want to say, at least 2 bugs that were pretty severe prior to even launching. And that's prior to even launching like a single part of the epic. This iteration of Frank, we hadn't even written code, and it caught stuff. Trying to be as vague as possible. But yeah, seeing that sort of immediate benefit and putting it almost in a way of, is this like our present selves problem, or do we want that to be like our future problem? Even having that conversation as soon as possible, it opens up so many doors. I really don't have any pushback at this point, because the benefits so much outweigh, you know, maybe me being in meetings for the whole day. Like, yes, I'm not, you know, actively testing. And also I'm so far ahead of all of these issues. Testing is now, okay, we need to run these 5 scenarios. Test execution is, we need to run these 5 scenarios because we've accommodated for everything else, whether that's monitoring, whether that's writing automation, whether that's collaborating with other teams, you know, to make sure that they have automation. Maybe it's not something that we can automate, you know, within your dedicated team. So yeah, I'm very grateful to have the team that I had, and also we've iterated on Frank at this point so much that the benefits very much outweigh the downside. The next iteration of Frank 2, I don't want to show too many of my cards, as well as enabling this to sort of be more widely accessible. The next iteration is also going to be, it's going to include some way to start actually aggregating some of these benefits. I don't think we'll ever be able to say like, oh, we saved X amount of development time, or like we saved X amount in revenue because this bug didn't get out into production. That I think is going to be impossible because it's not a sustainable way. You never really know. Teams are changing, priorities are changing. I do think though, being able to, you know, even just make a note of, yes, we hit the intended deadline. No, we didn't. And even taking a note of like, okay, these were the issues that came out of testing, whether that was testing, you know, that was happening during development, post-development, you know, launch, stuff like that. So yeah, I think that would be also a very good thing to start including in order to get buy-in. So being able to say, you know, you have your first Frank, and then at the end of that Frank, as part of the risk analysis, you also include like, hey, yeah, we did, or we were ahead of the deadline, or we missed the deadline because XYZ. Here were the bugs that, you know, escaped. When I say escaped, they escaped into production. Or, you know, here are the bugs that we caught ahead of time, or the issues we caught ahead of time. I like having concrete things to like give to people to be like, look, testing is important. Like we should do the thing. So for me, I think that is a natural jumping off point in terms to keep business people, product people engaged, as well as inform our future selves on the work that we had done.